On July 21st, 2024, Hakim, an authentic classic communist, released a video titled No One Is Replacing You. Roughly a week after that, anti immigration riots started in the UK. This is a perfect example of how a communist and a capitalist liberal see the world in the same wrong way. Both of them rationalize mass immigration through an economic framework. Europe has below replacement fertility rate and they are used to a certain living standard, upholding which requires people, hence immigration good. Sweden recently announced it will give money away for immigrants to leave Sweden. So clearly, our communist and liberal friends are wrong about what human beings actually desire. Most homeless people, drug addicts, criminals, and the like come from broken families. Most successful groups in the US are immigrants from India and China. This is not just a pedantic statistic, this is at the heart of civilization. The immigrants have strong families and values. If you have a strong family and community to support you emotionally, financially, and so on, you are much more likely not to turn out to be a self destructive person. In fact, you are likely to be a successful person. The number of people who fall into alcoholism and drug addiction because they don't have strong social bonds is it's almost all of them. The communist reaction to these problems is along the lines of let's give them aid. It's never let's strengthen the family. In fact, they will more often than not be hostile to the idea. Hence, Confucianism was the first target of the Cultural Revolution. In Russia, it was Christianity which was attacked and churches destroyed, in place of which they built community centers and social clubs. Of course, no one went to these parody churches, which is exactly what one should expect from communism, a parody Christianity. But that's a topic for another day. There is likewise no discussion in the groups of people who call themselves communist and socialist to bring back corporations of old, the things that were historically communal and social organizations. The guilds, for example, were part of the corpus that was the society, as opposed to the corporations of today, which are themselves the corpus, the parts of which are sold. The guilds were involved ethically in the decision making process and they were answerable to themselves and society at large. In stark contrast stands Facebook.com, which is answerable to its investors and not at all to society. Hence, it gets away with, you know, destroying it. For both liberalism and communism, the level of analysis is limited to the individual and the global government. There is no in between. Even the idea of nation states and democracy, which is often associated with liberalism, is ultimately not the level at which the liberal worldview can analyze, let alone function. There were hints of Marx going towards a more corporatist way after the Paris Commune, suggesting local councils, which is what Soviet meant, council. But in practice, the global homo view undermined any suggestions to even existence of such a thing as culture, both in the first and second world. In the end, communism is no more than a sibling of liberalism and fascism, a product of enlightenment and ideology based on ideology. Social threefolding, in stark contrast, is a framework based on actual experiences and understanding of the human condition. Primitive corporatism likewise had some viable alternatives to capitalism. Ultimately, however, we need to dig up the works of people like Rudolf Steiner. The through line here is in the liberal worldview, you are not primarily a member of your family and community, but instead a rational individual looking out for its self interest, which is, without exception, accumulation of wealth and nothing else. The idea that human societal structures are as complex and fragile as natural ecosystems and that even slight changes to it can bring down the whole thing doesn't make sense in this worldview. Civilization is built on relationships. You can have some of the best material conditions in human history, but if you have bad relationship with your neighbor, it won't matter. A communist does not, and cannot understand this simple, obvious truth. When a liberal speaks of integration, you can be sure he's not talking about a rigorous dialogue between the greatest minds of Islamic and Western world around the meaning of life and translating the results of such discussions into a way of life over centuries. When a communist speaks of cultural revolution, you can be sure he's not talking about the enrichment of diverse cultural expressions or the genuine exchange of ideas that fosters mutual understandings or anything like that. Workers of the world unite, they'll say, as if a worker from this part of the world is the same as a worker from that part of the world, easily and completely interchangeable, as if history, language, culture, heritage, and values of different civilizations don't fundamentally shape a person's character. Intercultural marriages or relationships are more likely to fail, and these are the people we can assume want to be together and get along. Scaling that on a global level, where a lot of the people simply don't desire that, is a doomed endeavor. The communists are, in fact, against all collective identities, such as familial, communal, regional, and national identities. Ultimately, they are against the most primordial collective identities of all, that of male and female. They are only superficially for the collective identity of the non existent global individual. There is a fixation, almost a fetishization of the individual identities. The communist vision, which is in reality the liberal vision, is that of homogeneity, not integration, that of global homo, not infinite designs. This global homo, then, is to be ruled by an authoritarian global government. If everyone is the same, why have different governments? This authoritarian global government is implicit in the very doctrine of liberalism, and in communism, it's rather explicit. The communist cannot even understand that declaring everything fascist actively destroys good relationships between living ecosystems that are communities and civilizations. The inevitable consequence of calling fascist things that are not fascist is a race war and fascism. It's so obvious a fact that one has to be an intellectual not to see it. Most crimes from immigrants are that of second generation immigrants, the children of the people who came to Britain and had a good relationship with the British people grow up to be radical Islamists, starting with a hatred for the British people, which they pick up from the BBC. Surviving and thriving is not only possible, but probable even under poor material conditions for all the metrics that are actually important. But with a bad relationship, when you have no reason to believe that the next person will let you live, the logical conclusion is conflict. All Hakim can really do is make a fascist caricature of the genuine immigration problem and give communist non solutions to it. And you'll find little difference between what he says and what a typical liberal says. The purpose of this video is not to wholeheartedly advocate for the alternatives mentioned here, it is to inspire people to go beyond the 20th century and to look for something other than liberalism, communism, and fascism by questioning the very assumptions on which they are built. I am sure humanity can do better than this.